In the last years of the marches, there were around approximately 59 death marches, approximately 200,000 to 250,000 murders. I don't call them deaths, I call them murders are what they are. A late offensive in the war after Stalingrad, after Kursk, the Russians started taking the offensive. The Allies, we landed at Normandy. The first major concentration camps that were discovered was in Lublin, Majdanek. SS Chief Heinrich Himmler, shortly after that, orders the evacuation of the concentration camps. And there's three reasons. One thing, they didn't want the prisoners to fall in the hand of the Allies to find out the true story. Anybody been to Auschwitz, you know at Birkenau, they blew up the gas chambers there, but to no avail. The SS also needed prisoners to maintain production of armaments, especially places like Middle Dora, which is underneath the ground, trying to, the last-ditch effort to build more V-1, V-2 rockets. And some leaders like Himmler also imagined that they could possibly use the remaining Jewish people as a bargaining chip for a separate peace with the Allies. There were many different marches, different areas. Most were marched into proper Germany, places like Dachau, places like Bergen-Belsen, Flossenburg, Sachsenhausen, Neuengamme. Death marches from Auschwitz, around 60,000 prisoners were forced on death marches from the camp itself. Thousands were killed in the days before the march. Tens of thousands of prisoners, mostly Jews, were forced to march in the snow, and then they were put in rail cars. Some out of Stutthof were marched to the sea itself and just machine gunned into the sea. A lot of the marches just went into circles, waiting for people just to die, trying to get rid of the evidence. You could see thousands and thousands of bodies that were strewn across the grounds. This is why we do this. This is why we honor these people.
I'll share with you a couple of statistics that I recently read from the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Now here's a group that for the past 53 years have conducted anti-Semitic studies in America, and just recently have expanded those studies internationally to 100 countries. And here's what they found out. They basically asked 11 questions, and in random interviews around the world, and if 6 out of 11 questions were answered affirmatively, then that person was considered anti-Semitic. There's over 1.09 billion people in the world that harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. In America alone, the number is 24 million adults, and that's about 10% of the population, which if you put that in perspective, if you're in a ballpark or some big congregation, every 10 seats, there's a person there that has a hatred to you because you're Jewish. It's an enormous amount. But the fact is, America has some of the lowest statistics for anti-Semitism compared to the world. UK, 12%, France, 17%, Belgium, 21%, Poland, 37%, Hungary, 40%, Romania, 47%, Greece, an astounding 67%. Can you imagine being in a country where almost 7 out of every 10 people would harbor anti-Semitic or hatred towards you because of your belief? who you are, what you were born, how you were born. It was interesting to see that countries that had some significant population of Jewish people had the lowest percentage of anti-Semitism. And I would tend to believe the reason is they have a voice, and it gets amplified through organizations like the ADL, the Holocaust Museums, the Jewish Federation, can amplify what people are standing for, like you are today. Countries that don't have a large Jewish base, there's no one there to counter them. There's no one there to stand up. There's no one there to say, hold on, that is totally off. That's propaganda. And it's amazing because the world's population of Jewish people is 0.2%. Where is there ever a significant, huge base of the Jewish people? Well, bless the Lord that there are also righteous Christians that rise up in times of needs and stand along with the Jewish population to make a point. And we're in a room full of that with you people today. Bless you.
Most of us learn from what we are taught by our parents, and there are some who perpetuate love, and there are some who perpetuate hatred, and there are some who look at their ancestors and say, that's what I want to learn the opposite of. That's what our Torah teaches us. Our Torah teaches us, don't treat the stranger. Treat the stranger as one of your own, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. And that we are taught not to treat people the way we were treated, but how we would have wanted to be treated. And their words came so beautifully from the translation by Chris Eggy, who has put so much of her heart and soul into the March of Remembrance since its inception. As Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And our obligation, we may not eradicate all hate, but we can move the indifferent to our side. The one other thing that I'd like to say is that among the forgotten groups, the groups that we don't focus on as much, that were enemies of Hitler's Germany, were those with physical or mental disabilities or handicaps or challenges. And I'm delighted that we have welcomed in an inclusive manner those who have those kind of challenges, for they have shown us true bravery, including those who, with difficulty walking, as well as a friend of mine who I saw earlier from the Jewish Community Celebration Company and Night Owls, who work with mentally disabled people, who help give them a way of self-esteem. And so when we're talking about inclusion and opening our hearts, as Rosalie said, it's not just about ethnic or racial, but it's about all those who are seen as other by some, and what we see them as, God's divinity. We were all created in the image of God.
Let us invoke the Spirit of God. Come, Spirit of God. Come, be present with us on this walk. Be present within us as we remember those who have died in the Holocaust, every victim, every stone that we carry, every heart that was touched by you and suffered injustice. Help us to be a witness to all those around us, a witness against such injustices, a witness to the truth of the Holocaust and to what it meant for its victims and survivors. And help us to have the courage to carry this movement on so that it doesn't end today, but that it continues in our hearts and in the hearts of everyone around us.
As a representative of the State of Israel, the only Jewish state, I see it as my duty to educate everyone about the Holocaust and what these horrific events means to me the Jewish community, Israel, and the world. Today in Israel, the entire country will stop at the designated time for 2 entire minutes to remember the Holocaust and its victims. Today in Houston, we have come together from all different faiths to pray, march, and commemorate this day of remembrance of the Holocaust and the heroism. This day and this moment allows me to think about my family and my relative that perished in the Holocaust. My great-grandmother died of starvation in the German blockade of Leningrad, and both of my grandmothers almost died as well, when both of my grandfathers fought the Nazis. Having a day to remember the Holocaust is important for every person on this earth. It works to prevent future genocides. The personal story given by survivors ensure that the truth is told and heard. Those who are descendants of perpetrators or bystanders or victims can come together and reconcile their pasts. Together, we all able to take a stand on modern-day anti-Semitism and racial hatred in all forms. Today, we all come to openly learn from the past. I know that these international marches impact and engage communities all around the world. And I am honored to participate today in this event. I'm also so happy to see so many of you here today, because you will be the ones to pass these stories to the next generation and ensure that from now until eternity, we remember the lesson of the Holocaust. Together, we will teach the truth, shine the light, and make sure we will always remember and never, never again. Thank you. God bless you all, and shalom.
Well, I stand before you here today as proof that miracles do happen. I would not be here were it not for very rare individuals who stood up just like you do today for justice and for what's right. Those are the rescuers. And I was asked to talk about them and what happened to me with those. These are the individuals who became extraordinary from being ordinary, the ones that knew right from wrong, the ones that risked their own lives to save somebody else's, but not just that, they were risking the lives of their families, their pets even. And the fear of that discovery was always with them and with me when I was in hiding. My first rescuers were actually my parents. They were interned with me in the Kovno ghetto, which was, as was told, one of the first, and was completely Judenfrei within almost a year. And that means that the Jews were either murdered or deported to someplace else, which they might have been murdered also. I'm here as one of the fortunate ones, and I live my life in gratitude. Because of those rescuers, I am here, and I have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren, and I am here to show the sanctity of life as well as the continuity of Jewish life on this planet. 10,000 were herded into what's called the 9th Fort, which is nearby to the ghetto, and shot within our... We could hear the cries, we could hear the actual shots sometimes. Then, not long after that, they had what's called the Kinderaktion, which is when they rounded up all the children, because the children and the elderly, the infirm, were not useful, they were dispensable. And at the Kinderaktion, they actually just threw the children into trucks like bundles and limbs flying, and well, my parents decided that I would be the first to be rescued. And they painstakingly, slowly dug a hole under the barbed wire that surrounded the ghetto. They were able to do so by timing the guards and the searchlights and risking their own lives, because any time that they would be discovered, it would be the end of all of us for sure. And then the miracle did happen. One day, the hole was ready, and they pushed me through it, again painstakingly timing the guards and the searchlights. And I was on the other side of that barbed wire where my father's secretary was waiting for me in the shadows. At that point, I was crying endlessly because I didn't know what was happening to me. I was 6 years old. And my father's secretary no longer could keep me because she was afraid of being discovered. But then there's also the light after the darkness, and these people who did that for me are now in Yad Vashem, which is one of the goals of Yad Vashem is to honor the righteous who did such great deeds. As a matter of fact, 24,300 righteous are listed in Yad Vashem, my rescuers among them. But that's a huge number, and then you have the other side of the darkness, which is why only 24,000. When we are here and see the anti-Semitism that happens around us, like the consul said, it is a changing world, and it's changing so rapidly. We have denials of the Holocaust, when Germany itself is the best recorder of this statistics of the Holocaust. We have governments who say it never happened. We have organizations, we have individuals, and it's rising around the world together with the anti-Semitism combined with the anti-Israel, and it's all melding into one big, dangerous trend that each and everyone would need to face, because maybe the Jews are first, but they're not the last. As Hitler said, we'll kill all the Poles. He said, we'll kill all the Germans because they didn't deserve to live if they lost the war. So see the other as yourself and respect and protect what you see is injustice and lies and cruelty, because anti-Semitic incidents have grown so fast and so many. And in our country, which is totally the best country, as my father said, we came to America because he said, this is the last country in the world where there will be a war on earth. And he was a wise man. And so in America, 15% of the citizens harbor anti-Semitic attitudes out of ignorance, out of propaganda, out of just ingrained family and religious bias. But it's dangerous because words of violence lead to acts of violence, and one has to stand up. And this March of Remembrance is so meaningful and important because it brings to your attention what should be done, what could be done, and you are the ones who can be the messengers, the prophets of this. You can go home and understand what the issues are and talk about it to your families, to your friends, to anybody who will listen. Make it a better world around you. You have the potential.
Up until last year, when I attended my first March of Remembrance, I pretty much just knew the basic stuff about my family. I knew that my 3 brothers and sisters were murdered, probably in the November 1943 deportation of children to Auschwitz, although I'm not positive of that. That my parents were in the ghetto in Shavl, which later became a concentration camp as the Kovna ghetto, where Rosianna's from. And during the war, in later years, when the Russians came and quote-unquote liberated the camps from the German and the Lithuanian murderers, the people in Shavl, and I think also from Konigsberg, Rosie will tell you about that, were deported to Stutthof, some by way of Riga, then by ship to Gdansk, or Danzig as it's known in German, and then on to Stutthof, and the men were then deported to Dachau.
I would like to first of all say that Rabbi David Rosen, Senior Rabbi of Congregation Beth Yeshuim, is unable to be with us today due to the loss over the weekend of a very well-known and deeply loved congregation member and friend of the March of Remembrance Houston. And he has wisely chosen to be with the family who are sitting Shiva, a traditional week-long mourning period in Judaism for first-degree relatives, and helping make final service arrangements. So all of our hearts and thoughts and prayers are with Rabbi David Rosen and the family today. As I have been going over some of the devotional time and prayer and scripture reading, I came across Zephaniah chapter 3, and I was reminded and encouraged of God's promises over Jerusalem and Israel. Zephaniah reminds us of God's dealing with the gathering of nations and the assembly of kingdoms who have been unjust towards Israel. It actually reminded me at times of the United Nations. Zephaniah also reminds us that the Lord promises to restore his people and that he is in the midst of his people. He says, "Do not fear. Zion, let not your hands be weak. The Lord your God is in your midst. The mighty one will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. I will deal with all who afflict you." Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 15 through 19. As a society, and sadly, even in the church today, we are witnessing the human inclination to casually disregard the fundamental and important lessons of the past. We must not settle into complacency and apathy or harden our hearts as to sit back on the beach of comfort and apathy. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was martyred during Nazi Germany, said, "When the rulers are silent before injustice, then the evil hand of violence is not far off." Micah 4 is a great reminder to me that one day all peoples will gather at the mountain of the Lord, at Mount Zion, and the weapons of warfare will be exchanged for tools of harvest. And I'm so blessed to be reminded also that the afflicted, the outcast, the weak, and the lame shall become a strong nation. God is gathering his people, the Jewish people from all over the world, back to their homeland, the land of Israel. It is important for us as the church, especially the Church of Houston, Greater Houston, Texas, and America, that we stand as a solid voice saying no more. It shall not happen again. We cannot sit idly by on the beach of apathy or comfort when so many of our Jewish brothers and sisters are under such great persecution. Shall we say together, never again?
So living there and hoping for the end of the war, which was really very close, that was the summer of 1944. The Allies already arrived in Normandy. They started to push towards Western Germany. They already took France. They started to take Belgium. The Russians were already almost at the Hungarian border. There was from the east, so there was great hope and great reliance on the fact that the war will end in a minute. So, but the war went on still because the Germans just kept on fighting, or thought that they are keeping on fighting. And what happened was that we stayed in that ghetto house, and one day the leader of Hungary, Horthy, has decided that he sues for armistice. So he decided to create an armistice which will stop the war. and he has declared that in the radio. Within 2 hours, a Hungarian nationalist, Szálasi was his name, took over, and the new period of killing of people started. That means men were again drafted between 15 now and 60, and they were marched towards Germany. If you look at the map, you see that from Hungary basically to Austria, which was at that time Germany, the way is something 160 miles. So they thought that they are making people walk there or shooting them on the way. They shot most of them on the way. They drafted women between the age of 18 and 50, and they did the same. So many women and many men, about 70,000, died this way, shot on the walking way towards Austria. So there was Erzsi, who was there throughout the whole summer, who came in, always told us news, bought us food, bought me and my brother chocolate. Unbelievable treasure during this time of history. So then Erzsi left the house and said, you go to this and this pharmacy where I know the owners, and you know the owners too, but I don't know what they would do for you. But for me, they promised that they would hide you for 2 days. So you go there, and I try to get for you Vatican papers. So at that time, the embassy of the Vatican, as well as the embassy of Sweden and Switzerland, and even Spain and Portugal, was giving out false passports, and I mean some original passports, but also falsified passports. And so Erzsi went to a Vatican house, to the Vatican embassy, and she was standing there online. Huge, many thousands of people stood there online. Then a Hungarian National Socialist tank came and started to shoot those standing in line. Most of them died. Erzsi stayed alive. Erzsi got the Vatican paper, and the Angelo Abotta, the head of the Vatican embassy, told her, you cannot go now on the street. Who knows what they are going to do? You will get false papers, he told Erzsi, from us. And when next people go from us away, you go with them. So this is what Erzsi did. Next day we were in that pharmacy, we got the passports, the Vatican passports. And we went to live in a Vatican house. We lived there for 2 weeks when the National Socialists came to gather us and take us to the ghetto. Erzsi was notified, Erzsi came to pick me up. From that time on, I don't tell you in details, but I was in some 17 places. From that time on, until she took me to my parents, whom she found a place in a so-called White Cross hospital. What a White Cross hospital is, I don't know until today's day. Then she took me there, and at the end, on the 2nd of January 1945, she took my brother. And so there we lived in the basement of that hospital while the Russians bombed Budapest day and night. All of these walks that we had was already during the time of terrible bombings. You have to know, and you can look it up, that Budapest was the 8th most bombed city during the Second World War. during these bombings, Ergi was walking with me and my brother, or alone with my brother, or alone with me, and with my parents. There were no people on the streets except those who were running for food. So she took us to the White Cross, one by one, to the White Cross Hospital, where we survived. And the Russians came in on January 1945, on the 17th of January. And we were freed. And my father said it's better not to yet go on the streets because who knows what is going on. And my brother said, nothing is going on. Here are the Russians. We have to go home immediately. And he convinced us that we have to walk home. As we walked, there were all these corpses alongside the road, all these bombed down cars and bombed down houses. I don't think we saw a single house that was not bombed down, and a single step where there were no corpses, dead horses, corpses, whatever you can imagine. And then finally, I don't know how long it took. Some people have asked me several times how long did this walk last. I have no idea. It could have lasted an hour. It could have lasted 1.5 hours. I don't know. But we walked into our street, and as we walked in, there was a little figure coming from afar, running towards us. It was Ergi. She said, I knew that you are coming home today. That is nice.
Und die Geschichte meines Vaters ist, er ist 1927 geboren.
And the story of my father is that he was born in 1927.
Und als er 9 Jahre alt war, haben seine Eltern sich scheiden lassen.
And when he was 9 years old, his parents divorced.
Was sehr untypisch war für diese Zeit.
Which was very atypical for that time.
Aber sein Vater hat den Kontakt zu ihm komplett abgebrochen.
And his father, as a result, completely broke contact with him.
Aber von der Seite seines Vaters gab es noch eine Verwandte, mit der er immer wieder mal
But on his
Kontakt
father's
hatte.
side, there was one female relative that had maintained contact.
Und so rief er diese Frau an,
So this lady,
sehr alte Frau.
this lady called.
Und er
Very
sagte,
old
kannst du
lady.
mir sagen, was mein Vater im Krieg gemacht hat?
And I called her and I said, can you please tell me what my father did? Her mother said, can you tell me what my father did in the war?
Und weißt du, in Deutschland gibt es so die offiziellen Familiengeschichten
And in Germany, there is an official family story.
und oft stimmen die gar nicht und oft sind die nicht wahr.
And quite often they're not true.
Und die offizielle
The
Geschichte war,
official story was
dass mein Opa nicht in den Krieg gehen konnte, weil er ein Lungenleiden
that
hatte.
my grandfather couldn't be involved in the war because he had a problem with his lungs.
Und als mein Vater diese alte Frau anrief,
But when my father called this old lady,
war sie sehr überrascht, dass er nichts davon
he
wusste.
was completely shocked himself what she told him.
Und sie sagte zu ihm, dein Vater war ein Ingenieur
She said, your father was an engineer
und er hat geholfen, das Lager in Auschwitz aufzubauen.
and had helped to construct the camps in Auschwitz.
Er war verantwortlich für die Elektrizität
He was responsible for the electricity.
und er hat 16 Kilometer Stacheldrahtzaun verlegt und mit
And
Starkstrom
he
belegt.
had built 16 kilometers, which is about 10 miles of electric fence.
Und Menschen, die verzweifelt waren, haben sich in diesen Zaun gestürzt, um einfach nur zu sterben, den Zaun, den mein Opa installiert hat.
And there were people who had thrown themselves on the electric fence and died, and that was the fence that my grandfather had built.
Und dann rief er sie nochmal an und hat gesagt, war das wirklich alles oder gibt es da noch was, was ich wissen sollte?
So my father called this same elderly woman back again and said, is there maybe something else you need to tell me that my father did?
Und dann sagt sie, ja, er hat auch geholfen, die Leitungen für die Gaskammern zu legen.
And she said, yes, he also helped install the piping in the gas chambers.
Und Er hat die Plattform geschaffen
So he
für
created a
den Tod
platform
von Hunderttausenden von Juden.
for hundreds of thousands of Jews to be killed.
Und als wir das rausgefunden haben, er war damals 80 Jahre alt,
As my father found that out, and he himself was 80 years old when he found that out,
das hat uns sehr, sehr zerbrochen und
that really
schockiert.
broke his heart.
Und mit 85 ist mein Vater nach Israel geflogen
My father, when he was 85 years old, flew to Israel.
und er ist dort zu den Holocaust-Überlebenden gegangen und hat seine Geschichte erzählt.
And he immediately the first thing he did was go to the Holocaust survivors he could find there and told his story.
Und er hat sie um Vergebung gebeten.
And he asked them for forgiveness.
I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, sweet refreshing, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, darkness abating, I'm pouring down. Do you notice? Have you taken the time? I'm here, my children, seek and know I can be found. I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, refreshing waters, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, my soothing sweetness, I'm pouring down. Seek me and find me in the sanctuary. Find me in your quiet time. I am breaking chains of darkness. I am pouring down. I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, releasing glory, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm your refreshment, I'm pouring down. Take a sip of my anointing. Take a sip of my glee. Come and get your great refreshing from me, beloved. From me, I'm pouring down, refreshing waters. I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, my tasty waters. I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, bitter free waters. I'm pouring down. Take a sip of my anointing. Take a sip of my glee. Come and get your great refreshing from me, beloved. From me, I'm pouring down, refreshing waters. I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, fresh waters. I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, I'm pouring down, fresh anointing. I'm pouring down.
Visit www.marchofremembrance.org for information on an event in your area. Here, Holocaust survivors, World War II veterans, and/or their families share their experiences as victims and liberators. Experience heartfelt testimonies, healing, and hope. Rise up and march against today's anti-Semitism.